Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. Over the last few months, I've been very busy working on my website. I, of course, have continued to post at least one video every week on YouTube. Well, only one video. I shouldn't say at least. It almost sounds like I'm posting more than one video, but I'm actually posting one video per week. I've also been working on my website, which is getting closer and closer to completion, and I'm super happy about that. I've also been busy working on personal art projects that I don't typically share on YouTube. I, at some point, will give you another studio tour and will give you a chance to see what it is that I do on my personal time. Well, I guess it's all work related, but for me, work and life in general just kind of intermingle because art is my passion and I live it every day. I've also been busy gardening because I'm an avid gardener. I never used to think I had a green thumb. My mom was always the one who was more of the plant person in our household, but she taught me a lot over the years and I have been able to start gardening and I have really been enjoying that. My channel continues to grow and I wanted to take a minute to again say thank you so much for all of your support, and I've really been enjoying connecting with all of you via comments. And if you ever have any questions or anything you'd like to share, I'm always happy to connect with you, and I really appreciate all your kind words of encouragement and support. And it's also just fun to have a few giggles along the way. So thank you for making the time to connect with me. I really appreciate that. Thank you again for watching, for subscribing, and for hitting that like button when you feel like it. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to connect with you as the year goes on. Now let's get going with the video. It's often the case that when I'm working on one art project, I've got other art projects on the go at the same time. I find this to be a very good way to work, especially with watercolors, because there is a lot of time that must be, I guess, devoted to drying the paper in between layers and whatnot. And so if I'm working on more than one project at a time, I feel more productive and it kind of keeps my creative juices flowing, if you will. The reason I'm mentioning this is that you'll probably recognize the colors I'm using today as some of the same colors that I used in a previous project that I worked on and posted here on YouTube a few weeks ago. Though I'm working with similar colors and a similar process, the outcome of my process is very different, and I thought it'd be nice for me to share this second process with you. For this painting in particular, I've decided to keep the colors in my background more muted. Since the paint and water I applied on my paper moved differently than it did on my last painting, it also is helping me guide my intuitive process, and the decisions I'm making along the way are different than the ones I made in the first painting. I'm using a smaller round brush here to draw a bit of a squiggly line, holding my brush very gently at the tip of it, and I'm applying paint in a very pigmented form, and then I'm using my water spray bottle to spritz the paint so that it moves it on the paper. This is different than what I did on the first painting, and I'm also not going to apply any more color than what is being applied now. A little bit later in the project I'll also be working with gold, but for now this is my background. Sometimes I do catch myself wishing that my paint would dry exactly the same as it was when it was first applied. But that's an interesting thing with watercolors, is that the colors you're applying will always dry lighter than they are when they're first applied. So it's something to get used to, and it's also something to work with. And over time, I have learned to work with that rather than try to work against it and force it from being something that it really isn't. Of course, I can always go in and add more layers of paint and use less water to make my paint colors more intense, but it's also possible to come in with other tools such as this fountain pen that I'm working with right now to add some more values. And so for this painting, I've chosen to leave my background lighter, and I'm using my pens and my markers to create more value contrast. Once my backgrounds are dry, there's always some marks that have been left by the paint and water as it was drying on the paper. And these marks, or different shapes that are created by the paint and the water, are what help guide me in my intuitive painting process. I look at them and I see how I can either add to those lines or how I can use them to create other shapes that will create some interest in my painting. For me, the intuitive painting process is a lot like letting my imagination run free and wild. Kind of like when I was a kid and I was laying down on the grass, looking up at the sky and seeing what different shapes I could pick out in the clouds. And I have been doing this my whole entire life. I will sometimes just, stare at floorboards and I'll see different images coming up in them. And I'll do that in wallpaper or whatever. It's always about letting your imagination kind of explore your mind and see what it recognizes from things you've seen before. My intuitive painting process is also a lot about just trusting that I have it in me to find ways to create something beautiful from something that looks relatively simple. For this reason, I rarely have a plan when I'm painting this way. And on the rare occasions that I do have a plan in my creative process, I also give myself permission to move away from that plan and go in a different direction if I feel called to do so. I would say I'm a law-abiding citizen, but when it comes to art, I'm very much a rule breaker. When I don't feel constrained by having to do things a certain way, I can move more freely in my artwork, and I can experiment and I can try different things, and I really come to discover the different marks that I like to make, the different colors I love to work with, and there's no obligation. It's really a freeing, relaxing, and enjoyable process, and I wouldn't want to create in any other way. So I played with my black pen for a while, and when I felt called to do so, I pulled out my white pen and started making different marks. I often get questions about the white pen I like to use when I'm working on top of watercolors. This pen I'm using right now is a Uniball Signo by Pentel, and it's by far my favorite pen to work on top of watercolors. I like it because it has a metal tip and the ink flows really well from it. No matter what pen I'm using, whether it be a dark, like a black ink pen or a white ink pen, they sometimes will get clogged up because working on watercolors, of course, as they're a soluble medium, sometimes pens can get clogged up. So I always keep a piece of paper nearby, and every once in a while I will scrub the tip of my pen on top of that piece of paper just to clear it from any watercolor that may have gotten inside the nib of my pen. As I was working on my painting and adding details to it, I started to get the feeling of a mountain landscape with the sun rising behind the mountains. And so I decided to pull out my circle guides, and I'm drawing a few circles that I'm going to use gold around, and this will recreate an abstract sun coming up over the mountains. One of my favorite artists on YouTube, if not my absolute favorite artist, is Cici from Création Cici. It's by watching her videos that I was introduced to the beautiful, brilliant, and shimmery paints, watercolor paints by Kremer Pigmente. And I ordered a paint set, it's called Pearl Luster Set, from them, and I am so in love with these paints. They are so brilliant and just so shimmery, and really, if it weren't for Cece, I would have never even known they existed. But their paints are just creamy and just absolutely beautiful. So I love using them, and I use them a lot in my paintings. So Cece, I don't know if you'll ever have a chance to see this video, but I want to say a huge thanks, not only for introducing me to these beautiful paints, but also for all the beautiful videos that you've created over the many years that you've been on YouTube. You really have been quite an inspiration, and you are such a good teacher. It's really wonderful to have you as a part of this teaching community. In hindsight, I kind of wish I had moved that line of dots on top a little bit more down, so just below the line that's just below it, that white line. But that's okay. I'm going to use some gold in the bottom portion of the painting, and that will help balance things out a little bit more. Here I've pulled out some white gouache, and I'm starting to cover some of those white lines that I created, because it wasn't really speaking to me for whatever reason. When I first started doing it, it was okay, and then it just, over time, as I kept looking at it, I just wasn't feeling it, so I decided to cover it. Now I've pulled out my black fountain pen again, and I'm going to add some stippling to the inside of my sun just to create a little bit more value contrast. And yeah, just because the sun is a little too muted right now, and I want to make it stand out a little bit more as a focal point. And I really think the stippling did the trick. What do you think? I love the stippling on my sun, and now I'm going to add a few more details to the rings. When I sit down to start adding details to a background, it's not uncommon for me to be able to complete a painting in one sitting. But sometimes I need to take a step back and just let things simmer, I guess, so to speak, so that I can come up with a different idea for what I want to do next in the painting. That's exactly what I did before adding details to my sun. I stepped away from my painting to take a break and have some lunch, and while I was having lunch, other ideas came to me. In my experience, it's always a good idea to take a break when you're not sure what to do next. Taking a break from the painting process gives us a chance to get a new perspective on our painting, and sometimes the ideas flow so much more easily that way. So if you're ever feeling stuck or unsure in your painting process, just take a moment to step away from it. Plus, taking breaks even in the creative process is good for self-care. I decided to add a few linear marks at the very top of my painting because it looked a little bit bare and it just didn't feel right to me. So adding these marks, very simple marks, just somehow ties everything together for me. Now it's time to pull the tape off my paper and have a closer look at the painting. Check out that gold, it's just so shimmery. I also really love how my details play well against the muted background. Now let's have a look at the two paintings side by side. Which one do you think you like best? Of course, they're both my creations, so I'm having a hard time picking one over the other. If I really had to pick, I'd probably pick the one I created today, but only because there's a little bit more gold. As always, I'm so thankful you decided to join me on this journey today. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!